Gery Deer and I go way back. He's been involved in marketing with a number of different programs. And Xenia? Jamestown. He comes from Jamestown, Ohio. And he's been involved with me at Trend Blindness Dayton, Ohio. And he's also done a number of different programs, as well as what he doesn't have here today is his lasso and whip trick that people.
You can't just open with that and leave it hanging there. That's different.
But today he's going to talk about his old nerd in the gym, fitness program, and podcast. Gery, it's all yours.
Thank you.
You want to introduce?
Yes, my partner back there is Julie Barth. She's actually the media director for my company, GLD Enterprises, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we get going here. So thank you all. Nice food, by the way. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
It takes a lot for me to say that, as she can attest. I don't really like food, so if I eat it all, you cut it off. Again, my name is Gery Deer. A lot of people mispronounce it. I'll answer to pretty much anybody with a check, so I don't care what they call me at that point. GLD Enterprises Communications is as one of the cards that you have, the little red, white, and blue, and that is actually my company. We've been in business about 24 years, and we do, as Tony said, we're a marketing, public relations, and communications company. Julie's part in that is that she is our media director, so her job is videography, audio, video, all that sort of stuff. Underneath that, Old Nerd in the Gym Fitness started out as a blog to help keep me busy. I was trying to get myself in back order, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. In more better health, trying to get everything, kind of moving as we all try to do as we start to get older. And it was meant to keep me busy. But we had bought all this equipment to do podcasting for other people, and Julie's idea was, why don't we just turn that into a podcast and see where it goes? And now we're about to start our third year. So it's gotten way out of control. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So I had a little bit of a rough beginning, and all this backstory is going to help a little bit as we get going here. But I was born with a whole bunch, I don't think Tony knows any of this. I was born with a whole bunch of different kinds of birth defects, to the point where I spent probably the first 20 years of my life at Dayton Children's. Back then we called it Barney's. Anybody remember that? Yeah. So it was this surgical procedure, that surgical procedure, trying to fix this or correct that or do the other. So I spent a lot of time on the other side of one of those bassinets like that. But I had a normal life. I grew up on a family farm in Jamestown. We had a cattle farm. And that is my actual pony, not one they stuck me on and took a picture of. But that's the one I actually grew up with. And did a lot of things, 4-H, band, pretty normal stuff. The lower picture is actually just from a couple of years ago. I was cutting our hay at our family farm, which is still there. But I also worked a lot in the media over my lifetime. So I started writing in college, and that sort of took on its own life. I ended up working for pretty much all the major publications in this area. Those are probably the three that people know the most, the larger organizations over the years. But everything from Dayton, Columbus, Cincinnati, Chicago, and out in Oregon, I've been writing for many, many years. So that took a lot of what I was doing, but eventually, I sold my first piece of writing at the age of 19 to my college paper for $4.85. I'm roughly 100 times that cost now for one of those articles. It took me 4 days, and I never thought I would get it done. And there's something about being a writer for a living. It's like having homework every night for the rest of your life. Wasn't the best idea. But I did some good stuff during that time. I parlayed all of that into our marketing agency in 1998. And it was opened up as a combination between IT and marketing and public relations because I had such a connection with the media. PR was really more involved than the marketing side. But it got some notoriety from our advertising awards over the years for copywriting and for creative direction. And I got a Pulitzer nomination and an Ohio Public Media nomination in 2010 for the same series of articles I had done on service organizations for counties that actually went together to help individuals. So all this kind of ties into some of the stuff that we're talking about today. But that also means that you work in a lot of places in the media, and that gives me the opportunity to do a lot of things and get these messages out a little bit easier. I have access to TV, radio, all that sort of stuff. I'm regularly a freelance producer on Living Dayton on WDTN, if you see that show. We've been stuck behind Zoom cameras for the last year, but we're about to go back in the studio. That's going to be fun. I miss that. We do a lot of video productions now. Julie and I do a number of productions for various companies, focused mostly on public relations. And I think that was my very first stint as a PR consultant. I was a speaker, actually the public relations coordinator for a nonprofit tutoring agency here in Dayton. It was around for about 10 years. So this is where the meat of this is. This is my family in 1968. This one right here. So my mother and father, my brother and sister are there. They're a lot older than me, as you can tell, a good bit older actually. My brother's 17 years older than I am. And so I was kind of oops, it was a cold winter, and I came out at the end of September, so 9 months. But my mom and dad, really, they worked very hard. My dad, before they bought the farm when I was younger, I didn't move to the farm until I was 7 years old. Prior to that, they lived downtown Fairborn, and my dad worked for NCR for 19 years, for which he got $47 a month, by the way, in retirement. Leads into some of the next part of this. But my brother and my dad started a business in 1961, probably where I get my entrepreneur side from, and a farm is definitely that as well. But they have a trucking business, Gery Deer and Sons. That was the last picture taken of the three of us with one of the trucks. They hauled sawdust. How many of you have been to Young's Dairy, I'm assuming? Probably everybody, right? If you walk in the sawdust, that's ours, even to this day. My brother still delivers to them and has since 1969. So it's been around a while, and I work with them when I need to. I haven't for some time, but while my dad was first retired, we had to kind of figure out how we were going to do this. So that was a different kind of thing. But I took care of my mom first, and that's where we're leading with some of this. Mom had early stages of Alzheimer's around 2003, 2004, and then it really started to advance. In 2009, she broke her leg, not her hip, but her actual femur, her leg, and that changed everything. She wasn't able to walk anymore. Her mind was already pretty much gone. And I spent about 60 to 100 hours a week next to her, taking care of her. We kept her at my family farm with my dad. My cousin moved in to help us. My dad's insurance was pretty good. He was a retired teacher as well. He taught agricultural mechanics for 17 years. But it wasn't good enough for that. And they didn't pay for very much. We eventually had hospice, and that pays for a little bit. It helps some things, but you don't have regular day-to-day care. So my cousin and I took care of her. My brother was one of those people that I said, I needed a grab bar, and grab bars appeared. Or I need a ramp, and a ramp appears. That was his forte, so we let him take care of that stuff. My sister wasn't in the picture, so it was really just me and my cousin taking care of my mom. Mom passed away in 2011 from complications of Alzheimer's. I don't know if you know this, but you don't die of Alzheimer's. You die of all the crap that it does to you. So she finally succumbed to everything. But she had a good quality of life for that last 2 years. When she first broke her hip, she actually went into a rehab center for about 3 months. And while she was there, she was septic 3 times, for which one time I nearly got arrested for taking her out of the building because I warned them if they didn't get her to the hospital, I was going to take her myself. And at the time, we didn't have a guardianship, so they were going to lock me up for getting her to the hospital. She had a fever of 108. And at 74 pounds, that's a bad idea. So I was willing to pretty much do everything, but we did get her out finally and took care of her ourselves. My dad, Gery Sr., by the way, my name is Gery. It looks weird because there's an E and an A. This gets very confusing. My father, Gery Sr., as I said, he developed Parkinson's disease. And shortly before my mother got really bad, he was already showing signs, which is, the small hand tremors that you see a lot of people get as they get Parkinson's. He was not early onset by any stretch. He was in his 70s when it first set in. So we didn't really see a lot of it until it started to seriously advance. I took care of my dad for the last 6 years of his life by myself. Essentially, what I mean by that is I had to make all the decisions, do all the things, move him out of his house, which that was a nightmare. My dad did not lose it. He was fully aware of what was going on, fully there. He didn't have any sort of dementia. Imagine this you know, you seek what kind of guy he is kind of from those two pictures, just that he's the strong guy. Now, I'm not leaving my house, and, you know, that was it. But once we convinced him, he had had a couple of falls. Julie helped me with him. My wife, my family were there to support, but I had to do pretty much all of this alone. My cousin wasn't there anymore. It was a very different thing. So it's harder with a parent because, you know, people say, well, it's like taking care of a kid. No, it's not. Kids don't get dignity. I say, kid, go to bed, kid goes to bed. You can't do that with him. You know, it doesn't work like that. You get the I brought you in this world, I'll take you out kind of thing. Even if he can't walk, he's throwing his walker at you, you know. So, but I've been throwing this word around, caregiver. What do you guys think a caregiver is? Just say
What you were doing.
Pardon me?
What you were doing.
What I was doing?
Yeah.
Someone who's giving care to someone, whether it's a family member or someone that needs care.
The support, right. So this is what the government calls it. This is the definition that the government has in all the documentation. And I've paraphrased just a little because it's like this long. So here's what it says. But it's mostly called an informal caregiver, and I'll get to why that's an insult in a minute. But it's an unpaid individual, unpaid we're talking about. As Tony said very clearly, spouse, partner, family member, doesn't matter who it is, who's involved in assisting others with the activities of daily living and medical care. So the reason that the word informal infuriates me is because I don't know where everybody else was who was formal, but I was standing there the whole time. I think that's pretty formal. And the thing that they do wrong about this is that not only is it virtually impossible to get support for the caregiver themselves, but that support is based on sometimes income, sometimes the type of disease you have, sometimes the Medicare that you have, whatever your coverage is. There's things like this that just get in the way of everything. But let's talk about another thing. Just throw out there, in the United States of America right now, how many informal, as we've discussed, family member, whatever, unpaid, how many caregivers do you think there are?
37 million.
Who?
37 million.
37 million?
I was going to say about 40, 50 million.
Anybody else? 43
There
million.
you go.
Wow.
That's pretty good, Tony. Price is Right's waiting for you. 43 million. Let's put the numbers into perspective. So did you know how many people that really is? Because I don't think we get it. That's 2.5 times the number of living U.S. veterans. 2.5 times the number of those people. Let's keep going. Why do we have the presidents up there? Well, because in South Dakota, there's only about 980,000 people. That's 43 times the number of people in a state. It's more than that if you go to North Dakota, because there are fewer people in North Dakota. It's barely 800,000. Anybody have, you don't have to raise your hands. You're familiar with labor unions, right? Very powerful. 43 million is nearly 3 times, I'm going to read this very carefully, 3 times the total number of active members of all U.S. labor unions combined. That's teachers, teamsters, electrical, auto, you put it together, that's how many more of us there are than union members. Now think about how powerful unions are. Because they have money, lobbyists, all that, right? It's very important. Whatever your side is on union doesn't matter. They're very powerful. So that comes into play in a minute. This is what we end up as. Caregivers are sick. She can attest to seeing me go through some of the worst of that, with my dad deteriorating so rapidly. In the last year when I had him in my house, you know me pretty well, you wouldn't have recognized me. I was a mess. And I had done this before. I was pretty good at it. But I was not prepared for his level of decline. I was not prepared for the lack of support and help that we would be missing out on. So what happens is we're getting sicker. And then that leads you to understand a few things about them. Here's some statistics for that. A lot of guys in here I know that are good with numbers. 63% higher mortality rate than the average person. Why? Because we're sick all the time. Stress. You can't get better. And plus we're putting all, and I can tell you this too from my own experience and people I've talked to in the last several years since I've been doing these. You tend to put that person first. So you don't eat until they eat. You don't sleep until they sleep. It's in that way, it's a little bit like parenting. You know, there's some similarity there. 2/3 of the people who are caregivers have to rearrange their work schedule. What I left out of that statement is that that's assuming you still have a job. Because now COVID has actually made that easier. COVID was a godsend to me in one way, in that everybody now had to go to Zoom. I didn't have to go to meetings anymore. B and I, H7, we all ended up on Zoom calls. I didn't have to leave the house, which is great because I couldn't. I had 8 hours of in-home care for my dad, period. 8 hours. That's 4 days a week, 2 hours a day. I couldn't leave the house. But I run my own thing, but that still does, I still can't get out to market or sell anything or do stuff like this. That's how I get my word out. So if you can rearrange the work schedule, you're assuming you still have a job. Depression is, common is not a big enough word. It's actually epidemic. Depression is terrible among caregivers. It's probably the worst next to military, who've just left service, things like that. The depression is awful. The average loss in Social Security benefits, and actually this number is from 2 years ago, this has gone up, 25,494, it's actually closer to 34,000 now. And we actually increased caregivers during COVID because there were family members who were required to take care of their family who had COVID because the hospitals wouldn't take them. So that added to this number. And then the last one on this list kind of sort of figures with the rest of it. We are 2.5 times more likely to live in poverty. And the reason for that is we're losing our jobs. We are losing benefits. We don't have enough money to take care of especially if it's a parent and the parent is on fixed income in the first place. And you move them in with you or you move in with them, now you got two people existing on partial money. So when my dad's retirement was about $700 a month, plus the $47 from NCR. Thanks for that. That was it. I had to do everything with $700. If my mom hadn't paid off our farm in the 80s, I don't know what I would have done. We had to come up with property tax money, but my brother and I did that through the business, and we were able to take what small. And then he got sick. My brother got sick. He had a brain infection. Now I'm really on my own because he was pumping a little bit of money in, sort of as a retirement for Dad. He would take part of what he made on the trucking business, which is still part-time, and drop that into the bank account. So this becomes a reality for people, even if they started out with money. It tends to dwindle pretty quickly. The other thing we don't notice very much, and this may be hard to see because of that background, PTSD is really common with caregivers for the very reason that it is common with military service people. You've got this traumatic event that doesn't let go. You know, for the first 4 or 5 months after my dad passed away, he died last July, by the way, 1st of July. He wanted to make sure we got that next Social Security check, so he held on for a little bit. We had to give it back. Nobody told us that part. So this list of things that you get, especially the bottom one, dealing with extra stress after an event, such as a loss of a loved one, pain, injury, loss of a job or home, that puts you into that same state as a combat veteran. It's very much like it, and you see people being treated very much the same way. In my case, what I was going to say was after a couple of months even after my dad died, I still heard him wake up and call for me to go and take him to the bathroom. And sometimes I still do. He was just down the hall from me, you know, and that was a common thing. And there towards the end, it got rougher as time went on. Let's just put it that way. Parkinson's especially adds to this, and so does Alzheimer's. But to me, Parkinson's was worse. We only think of Parkinson's disease as the shaking and the movements. What we don't realize is the level of deterioration that happens in the nervous system. Your electrical system basically shuts down and shreds itself. So my dad was undergoing changes in his body, but not his cognition. He wasn't getting dementia. So he was aware, but didn't know what to do with it. It was really frustrating because how do you deal with something like that? And which of these things is part of that hangs on after the fact? And they don't have to die, by the way. You're going through this while you're dealing with it because you're in a constant state of this, just constant. You wonder if before I brought him to my house, he's alone part of the day at his house, which is 3 minutes away, regular speed, and I could get there in about 1.5 minutes. And it was just, when is the phone going to ring? My call is going off. He had a life call button. Gosh, he's fallen again. The thing would pop up. Something Massachusetts, wasn't it? It was just like really tiring. This is what it looks like. That's what caregiving looks like. That picture was taken by accident. Same cameras in his room. And I remember this, it was a Sunday night, and we were exhausted. About 3 weeks before he died. He had been up for 3 days straight. I'd had about 15 minutes of sleep in the last 48 hours at this point. And I'm sitting in his wheelchair, and he finally went to sleep. And the pain was just agonizing. Everything they gave him, the nurses had been there, the hospice folks were there every night, but they didn't stay there. They come, they do something, they leave, they give you more medicine, they leave. And I'm administering all this stuff, and he's getting worse. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. This is a guy who watched me on the other side of that bed rail and had to stand there. And I remember my mom telling me this, my dad would stand there and go, what's going to happen to him? And here it came out backwards. I'm on the other side of the hospital bed because there's no support, there's no representation. At 43 million people, think about how much representation the labor unions have, the veterans have, the whoever. Somebody's preaching for them somewhere. There's money changing hands. We have nothing, zero. There's no organization for caregivers. It doesn't work like that. If there were, we wouldn't be able to pay the dues. We don't have any money. So how can you help? This is where it gets to be. First thing is, in order to do any good for anybody else, you have to take care of yourself. If you are a caregiver or you know somebody that's a caregiver, the idea that you want to first help them to take better care of themselves, because we always use the airplane safety instruction analogy that if the thing drops out of the ceiling, you put it on you first and then help somebody else. Because if you pass out, you can't help a kid, right? Or whoever. So this is about taking care of yourself. If you're not the caregiver and you're trying to help someone else, be available. That's all you got to do. Show some help. Do what you can. Give them some respite. Bring a meal. Do whatever you want to do like that. They will not want the help because they don't want to be a burden themselves, so they put it off. The other thing is water. This sounds really silly, but believe it or not, the first piece of advice we give on an old nerd in the gym is drink water. Because most caregivers, the number one problem they have when you check them out, if they don't have other underlying issues, is that they're dehydrated. Because you're constantly worried, you don't think of it. And so, well, I got coffee, I've got soda, that's not water. It's not the same thing. So we try to get that up, cut down sugary stuff, do all that sort of thing. And better nutrition. One of the things we do, we try to tell people, if you're going to help a caregiver, bring them food. I don't mean McDonald's, I mean bring them that. Because that is expensive and it's hard to get to. So you call Grubhub and you call whoever to deliver things because you're stuck there. You can't leave. Bring them a nice meal. Bring them something like that. You know, the stuff that we had here today would be amazing. Anything like that would be helpful. Sleep? I don't need to say that. You know, this guy's got it down. 70 million Americans suffer from sleep, and that's including all of just normal people. Everybody has this problem. It's a big deal. But we're all like, go, 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 because we're high at our career, we've got business to run, families to deal with. But when you're a caregiver, you saw what it looked like in that picture. That's what it looks like. You're exhausted all the time. And time is not on our side, by the way. Efficiency and planning is a big deal. So if you know a caregiver that's having issues, help them plan their week. Help them schedule things. It will make a big difference because their brains are all over the place. We're worried about keeping dad safe. He needs his medicine, he needs this, he needs that, he needs the other. Maybe they don't know how to do it. And you don't get a lot of support with that either. So if you know how to do stuff like that, give them some help. They don't know how to do insurance papers or call somebody to find out how to get depends for half the cost. You know, help them with that. That's all massively, and that'll save some of that time as well. And then exercise, which is what the old nerd in the gym is all about. And we did that, we took that another step. I took my dad to a boxing class. And Julie went with us. She saw what that was like. He was very resistant. He did not want to go to the Parkinson's boxing class. I don't want to go where those old people are. Pop, you seen a mirror lately? He wasn't fooling anybody with that comb over either. I finally cut it off. But there was just this Drake's Gym downtown Dayton right here. They have a Parkinson's class. And they worked very closely with us, and I went and did it with him, and I started encouraging him and working with him in my own exercise because they cut off our physical therapy. He showed this much improvement, and that was it. Insurance chopped it. That was it. It's over. So I took it over. And then we got a little more later because he had a fall, so they reinitialized it. So then I had them teach me how to do it with him. So I took him to the gym with me every Sunday, and then I did the rest of the stuff with him during the week. So you have to think about all this a little bit differently. We don't understand what this is because you're not going to hear any of the politicians talking about this. You're not going to hear Democrats, the Republicans, the indifferents, none of them. Because this doesn't make any money. There are no survivors except us. We are the survivors. The family members, if they're elderly, they're going to die. That's just it. We're all going to die. That's how it looks. But there is no survivor to parade around and stick a ribbon on and have a parade about it, put them on a poster. It doesn't work like that. Show that face of those people who are dealing with this, and you've got it. So we came up with The Old Nerd in the Gym, and it's a podcast focused on caregivers. And the idea is that people can listen to the experts that we bring on the show to talk about issues that everybody who is like me have. And we interview this one, the boxing one, I especially love that because we went there and we recorded the thing and you got the boxing sounds in the background and everything, and it was really great. And you can find that pretty much anywhere. And I'm just about wrapped up here. You've got cards and everything for the Old Nerd, but I want to put one thing back on the screen. Don't forget that picture. That picture is incredibly hard for me to look at.
You look 80 years old in that picture, man.
Yeah, I felt 80 years old.
I remember I was talking about that, about when you was working with you.
I was at the height of it too during that. It was all I could do to get away to come see you guys and do all the business.
Those weeks you could talk our illustrious administration to cut loose a few of the billion and put it towards.
Well, you can. Well, no, I see his point. You can fire the administration you want because not one single one has done anything about this. None of them. And they're not going to. Again, there's no money in this. There's no popularity to this.
I tell you what, when I used to work, before I went in the health insurance business, I was a debit agent working over in East and West Dayton. And there's a lot of people like you who are with parents.
You know, I should point that out. One of the things I discovered that I did not know is that the majority of minority families keep their family members in their home.
In home.
As they age. For two reasons. One, it's in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
My family, it was in the culture. The other reason was there was no money or insurance. Where's that? Where's that from any administration? Because they're not doing that. They're not helping anybody. Doesn't matter which side you're on, they're not doing it.
I mean, people's houses I went into where there was medical beds, hospital beds in the living room.
That's where we had my mother. Yeah. We converted the middle of the farmhouse into a hospital room. And that way everybody could be there and talk to her and see her, and she was fine. She was awake. She was like having a toddler. You know, she was just smiling, doing her thing, but she spoke, it was gibberish. It was just very difficult to handle. Anybody have questions?
No, I didn't understand the old nerd in the gym. I thought it was like you working out, talking about workout.
It was.
This is deep.
That's how it started, and then it became this.
This is deep. Like I said, I knew about you taking care of your parents, but I didn't understand the premise behind this.
It gets harder.